before we officially start. So then I would suggest that we formally start. I say good afternoon from my side. I would like to welcome you all to this Bidding Zone Review Stakeholder Workshop. My name is Peter Scherer. I'm Vice Chair of the ENTSO-E's Market Committee. So from ENTSO-E and TSO side, we are very aware of the great importance of this Bidding Zone Review and the possible consequences for you as stakeholders. Possible adjustment of the electricity bidding zone borders would not only affect us as TSOs, you as stakeholders today, from market parties, what I have seen, producers, consumers, authorities, associations, might as well heavily be affected, or even more than we as TSO are. Now it's a good time to plan for more and regular and broader stakeholder involvement that will later on be introduced, the process there. So just to explain for you, the last 2 years have been characterized by methodological developments at ACER and regulatory and TSO side. As TSOs, we spent enormous resources already in the preparation work for the upcoming bidding zone study. To perform the study, we have to run complex modeling change, including market modeling, grid redispatch, and many other simulations all over Europe. So a huge modeling IT chain has to be built up and was already being built up in the last 2 years. In March, we handed over the results of our local marginal price simulations to ACER, where we go later on in the detail. But just to sum up, this was the first time a nodal pricing simulation study of this size and level of complexity has been performed in Europe. We have carried out local marginal price simulation for continental Europe and Ireland with a model that includes 25,000 active generators, 22,000 lines, 25,000 active nodes and critical network elements. We had to solve security constraints, economic dispatch problems, 168 days for continental Europe and Ireland. So this was an intensive work that has been performed on IT level, computers, hard and software, and manpower. As well, the Nordic TSOs performed a similar complex study there, as well in this kind of complexity first time. Just to sum it up, internal resources on manpower, IT, software have been enormous. Still, all this was rather internal preparatory work together with NRAs and ACER, while during the coming study, a more deeper stakeholder involvement is planned. By good reason, the methodology we later explain and go through foresees as well your involvement. Market parties have as well their view on liquidity issues or on transition costs in case we change the bidding zone border. And in the coming process, we try as much as possible to consider real knowledge as well there. But before we go now to the presentation and start, I would like to thank all the colleagues that have heavily been involved in this work up to now. Mainly I'd like to thank you, Marta and Fred, who have been leading the work up to now, as well all the experts from the Bidding Zone Task Force, the LMP group and the Secretariat. And last but not least, I'd like as well to thank ACER and the NRAs. This very detailed and, to be honest, complex methodology and the LMP work we have now, to really be honest, it was not an easy task. Still, we realized every time when talking to each other, to ACER or NRAs, we every time found a way forward and a solution, and the balance between what is needed urgently and what is possibly technically wise. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today, we give a brief introduction framework explaining the framework. Then please consider this LMP means local marginal prices. This means a kind of nodal pricing simulations that will be presented in more detail by the experts. And then we deeper explain the next step of the bidding zone review. And as there is one part, the stakeholder involvement, what is planned there. And then we have a Q&A session. That's roughly the framework we go now for. So next slide, please. Next slide, housekeeping rules. Martha, might you take over for the housekeeping rules?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, maybe just a short reminding for these housekeeping rules. We are more than 100 in the workshop. So first of all, thank you very much to all to show this interest. But due to that, we have agreed on these housekeeping rules. Maybe just the first for information is that this workshop is going to be recorded. You can add all your questions directly in the chat. All your questions will be answered either during the workshop, in the chat by one of us from the colleagues from the Bidding Zone Task Force, or by email after the workshop. The workshop is going to have different sections. It will take each section around 10 to 15 minutes each. Each of the presenters will pick one or two questions, from the chat to answer after their section. And as Peter has said, there will be a general question and answer session at the end of the workshop. In this last part, you will be invited to raise your hand and ask directly your question. In case nobody would like to ask, of course, we will go back to the chat and pick a couple of questions from the chat. Very simple rules also, please mute yourself unless you are presenting or asking any questions. The slides, all the slides that you are seeing here are going to be published in ENTSO-E website. Also, we will arrive there, but we will have the terms of reference of the consultative group. This will be also published just after the workshop, so you will be easily be able to find it after the workshop in ENTSO-E website. So this is all for the housekeeping rules. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, so let's go ahead with the next slide. So we give a rough overview, later on going in more details. What is a bidding zone review? Just it's a study performed by us as all TSO. We do it in regions. In the end, we will sum it up in one common report published on ENTSO-E site. Performed by us as TSOs, we check and investigate alternative bidding zone configurations. Why do we do that? There are several ways to trigger a bidding zone study. One way would be, for example, what we have to do regularly anyhow. This is a technical report on grid constraints of the last 3 years. Such a report might trigger a bidding zone study, but this time it was not triggered by this technical report on grid constraints. This time it was triggered by the Clean Energy Package and there the Regulation 2009-943, where it was foreseen to perform a bidding zone study. So how do we do this study? The general methodology and framework is defined in the CACM regulation, what we have to do. And on top of that, there is room for more specific description, what has to be done, what has to be performed, and ACER took a decision there in November what we have to do. And some more specific on what we have to investigate, which bidding zone eliminations, we expect a decision from ACER in June 2022 on that. So the purpose of all this is to investigate whether alternative bidding zone configurations increase economic efficiency and cross-border rate opportunities while maintaining security of the electricity grid. The focus here of what we study is the year 2025. That means somehow we are in the middle of building additional grids, but this is foreseen in the regulation that we have to look 3 years ahead while performing the study. So what we have in the end will be, like mentioned, a report all over Europe. Still, the studies themselves will be done in the regions separately. And as well as conclusion, we as TSO we receive a framework from Acer, methodology that we have to follow. We do the study and then we hand it over. And in the end, the decision what to do to change or keep the bidding zone borders will be a decision on member state style. So next slide, please. So this is roughly a sum what I already explained. Focus year 2025. We compare the status of status quo bidding zone configurations to alternative bidding zone configurations where we assume a decision by Acer in the summer. And we do economic efficiency studies, we do grid overload, redispatch runs, and all this. So we performed this study during 12 months, starting in summer this year. Next slide, please. The regulation 2019-431 foresees a roughly framework that we as TSO have to propose a methodology how to do the study. This is something we handed over already in 2019. We had 3 months after the regulation was in power. And then NRAs had 3 months to take a decision on the methodology. And if the NRAs didn't agree, NRAs had 3 months to decide. Then 1 year for the bidding zone study. And then the member states have 6 months to decide to keep or change bidding zone borders. So this is roughly what the regulation foreseen. And if you jump to the next slide, there we can see that we are already beyond somehow this rough framework in the regulation by some reasons. As TSOs, we handed over a methodology in October 2019. In the end, this methodology was discussed with NRAs, among NRAs. Was an intensive discussion. It ended at Acer's desk, and Acer took a decision on the way forward in November 2020. So something that was foreseen by Acer in negotiation and discussion as well with NRAs and after public consultation framework, this was to add a new step that was not so clear by the legal framework, but still by some good reasons by Acer, this was to perform this LMP local marginal prices study. That means that we check the prices in each node and hand this over to Acer. In addition, we handed over a huge package of data in March 2022. And at the moment, Acer is hardly working on this and will come back with a proposal by July this year, saying which alternative configurations have to be investigated by us as TSOs, taking your comments from market parties and all stakeholders into consideration. And this study will be performed starting in summer this year. Then we have for 1 year until summer next year. And then we hand it over somehow to the member states. They take the decision. And if the member states could not agree on a framework, then the European Commission would be in charge on consulting Acer on the way forward. So this is a more detailed point, and during today's presentation we keep or deeper dive in all these processes, the work that has already been done from our side. We are at a stage somehow where we handed over the LMP work, but we will as well show a deeper process what we're going to perform in this bidding zone review study. So next slide, please. So do you have already questions to be answered now? Like mentioned, from details, please keep them back for the later presentation on issues, but on the general framework, do you have questions? Please write them in the chat.
Yeah, I do not see any question in the chat. So maybe we can continue.
I see one hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
But I do not see the name, to be honest, yet.
From Marie.
Then, okay, Marie. we have the time for the question, even we dig later on deeper.
Thank you. Just it was hi, Marie Bourous, Eurelectric and UEFI. A question of clarification. Can you recall the different biddings and review regions that will be foreseen in this biddings and review, please, according to the methodology and decision? Thank you.
So we have Nordics and we have continental Europe. And Marta, might you help in more details on the other details with Iberia and Baltics?
Yeah, I would propose we have a slide on this, on slide 31st. So you will see the map with all the regions. So maybe I would propose that we wait till there. And Maria, if you have still the question, we can answer it later. Very quickly, it will be Iberian Peninsula, Central Europe, Ireland, Nordic, Baltic, SEE, and CSI, so Italy. But there's a slide already on this.
Then let's wait for the slide. So at least now there is another hand. I think we have the time and can go for it. Oh. It's Johannes. Johannes,
yeah, now you can hear me now, right?
Please say as well from which association, yes, whatever company or authority you are.
Yeah, Johannes Schulz, RWE. A quick question on the process. Obviously, the process is mandated by electricity regulation and subsequent methodologies, but the situation in Europe has changed over the last weeks. Is that changing the process, the timelines? Obviously, assumptions made last year may not be relevant under today's world, unfortunately. So how does this impact the current thinking and process?
To be honest, here in the overall framework, we have to follow the methodology decided on ASO side. But you're right, we are quite aware on this completely new situation we have at the moment. But we have not, to be honest, really foreseen how to insert this and consider this. But during the process later on, you're going to see this stakeholder involvement framework on transition costs issues. There will be some parts that we could consider, but we do not have a complete new methodology or framework to be considered. But during the process, we will come on some points where we indeed have to discuss what to do. But at the moment, to be honest, you see how the process went. It's since 2019 we are working on the process. It's not so simple to just change and consider this new situation completely.
And the process may not have to be reconsidered, but the data points or the assumptions we take may change, right? Okay, good. Thank you very much.
So you see, I cannot give you a black and white answer. I say when we have good points where we say that we can include and we have a clear conclusion, then we do our best to consider, but I cannot say yes or no at the moment. I think this will during the next year for some points be a debate together as well with you, where we see that we can change something. But I cannot give you very concrete points that we could change at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay. I would propose let's have more detailed discussion when we jump into the topics that we go along to the next part. This is the LMP presentation, and I'd like to hand over to the colleagues. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Peter, and good afternoon to all of you. Happy to have so many people in the workshop today. My name is Frederick Zapp. I am the co-convener of the LMP project for the regions Continental Europe and Ireland. And together with Federico Quire, I'm leading this work for this region. And what I would like to start off with would be to give you a quick overview of the main model that we used for simulating the nodal prices. And what we can see, as mentioned by Peter, we have a very significant model dimension. So we are using around 25,000 nodes. We are using around 16,000 generators and batteries. We have around 22,000 lines, 12,000 trafos, and around 25,000 critical network elements and contingencies for approximating the n-1 case in our LMP simulations. In terms of main features that are part of our simulation chain, we'll come to that point later in the course of the presentation, how this is actually implemented in the simulation chain. We have the planned outages of generators that are considered. We have an optimization of storages on a yearly and on a weekly basis. We have all the reserve requirements considered in our LMP simulations. We are also considering implicit and explicit demand side response. And then we have the DC power flow with the n-1, so considering the 25,000 critical network elements and contingencies, and we are using a market-based RES model. In order to make get the simulation run times in a reasonable range, we had to apply some simplifications. And the first simplification is that we went from an integer unit commitment to a linear unit commitment. Then we used a granularity of 2 hours, also a parallel daily optimization instead of simulating each day sequentially. And also in this main work stream, we did not consider topological remedial actions. However, we also performed some tests in order to see the effect of topological remedial actions on the simulation results. The software we used in our process is Plexus, a software from Energy Exemplar. And we are simulating, as also mentioned by Peter and Marta, the target year, June 2025. In total, we performed the simulations for 8 representative weeks of 3 climate years. So we have 24 weeks in total that we are simulating. And as I mentioned, we also did additional runs to assess the effect of topological remedial actions on the simulation results, and also to see how these methodological simplifications I mentioned above impact the results. Also, referring to the comment, I think it was from Johannes, on how we take into account current changes, political changes in our simulations. In the LMP project, we did some sensitivity runs with increased CO2 and increased fuel prices to see how this could affect the simulation results. We will also come to that at a later point in the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, we can see the input data that we mainly used for creating the model for running the LMP simulations. We mainly have a centralized data source, so the TYNDP 2020 grid model, which for our purpose for the target year June 2025 was downgraded in the course of our project. And then we are using the so-called Pan-European Market Modeling Database for having input data in terms of generation and load. Then from a decentralized data source, we collected several input data from TSOs, for example, dynamic line rating, demand side response parameters, reserve requirements. We were in touch with the TSOs on the critical network elements and contingencies that were considered, and also on topological remedial actions that were used in this ex post simulations, which I'll explain at a later point here. So based on these data sources, we created a model for running the LMP simulations. However, it was not just like taking these inputs and just press play and starting the simulations. In order to make the simulations feasible, we needed to develop several methodologies in the course of our project, which we can see on the next slide. So mainly we developed 4 methodologies. So a methodology for selecting representative climate years and representative weeks for this specific climate years. methodologies for selecting critical network elements and contingencies for approximating the N-1 case. Maybe it's also worthwhile mentioning that for computational reasons, it was not possible for us to run a full N-1 simulation. And for this reason, we needed to come up with a methodology to approximate the N-1 case as good as possible. So this is the methodology we developed. Then for modeling implicit demand side response, and also a significant part of the project for getting zonal information. So for example, renewables target for specific countries from a zonal, from a regional level to a nodal level, which is necessary for running the LMP simulations. So if we go to the next slide, we can have a more detailed look in the actual simulation chain we developed in order to simulate the locational marginal prices. Basically, this main workstream consists of 3 steps: a planned outage scheduling, a connect selection procedure, the one I was just referring to, and a final N-1 simulation chain. So first of all, we started to allocate the planned maintenances for thermal generation units across the year in a way to minimize the impacts on reserve margins. For this, we used a module that is called PASA and is included in Plexos. And this helped us for scheduling the thermal generation units across the year in terms of planned maintenances. Then in order to identify the critical network elements and contingencies to be considered in our simulations, we started off with performing an N-0 nodal market simulation, and we analyzed the simulation results. So what we did is we considered each 380 kV and above element that is loaded in at least 1 hour higher than 70% and higher than 50% in case of double circuits lines as critical network element, so as potentially binding in the N-1 simulations. In order to derive the respective contingencies, relevant contingencies for these critical network elements, we ran a script based on a methodology that was developed under the umbrella of the system operation guideline, the so-called coordinated security assessment methodology. And based on some sort of influence computations, we were able to identify relevant contingencies for each specific critical network element. Then we also got in touch with the TSOs, and they had the opportunity to validate this list. And this gave us the final critical network element contingency list to be considered in the simulations. Then as a last step of the main work stream, we performed, first of all, a zonal simulation for deriving demand curve parameters, which are necessary for modeling the implicit demand side response. So in particular, the slope and the intercept. This is the first part. Then we ran a yearly so-called midterm optimization in Plexos to derive weekly targets for the storages. Then we went a bit more into the detail, did weekly simulations in order to derive daily targets for storages that are then considered with the implicit explicit DSR with the final connect list and some further parameters, for example, dynamic line rating and so on, in a final N-1 nodal market simulation, which is performed running the so-called short-term optimization module in Plexos. So this is basically the simulation chain we applied for deriving the final N-1 simulation results, the N-1 nodal pricing simulation results in the end. And on the next slide, we would like to also inform you about our process for running the so-called topological remedial actions workstream. So we wanted in the course of our project not only do sensitivity runs to see the impact of different input parameter on the simulation results and of different modeling assumptions, we also wanted to see how the application of topological remedial actions could change the simulation results. And for a subset of the 3 most congested weeks, so 3 out of 24, we gave the TSOs the opportunity to identify relevant topological remedial actions. So they were able to provide a feedback on what topological remedial action to be applied. And these topological remedial actions have been properly modeled in Plexos. Then, in the end, we rerun the final N-1 market simulation with all the details I just explained. For these 3 specific weeks, considering all relevant features and also the topological remedial actions, and to see how the application of topological remedial actions influences the final simulation results. So this is basically it from my side in terms of input data, model, and methodology. And with this, I'd hand over to Federico. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Federico Quaglia from Terna, and as Fred said, I was a co-convener of the LMPISA group, which ran the LMP simulation. We are now going to have an high-level overview of the results that we got from the simulation. Before doing so, I would simply remember that LMPs are an important input for defining alternative bidding zone configuration according to the ACR methodology. Anyhow, they are not the only input. Additional assessment will be made on ACR side, namely also loop flow, flow decomposition. And so we cannot derive or draw some conclusion according only to the results of the simulation that we have in terms of alternative configuration. So what we can see in this slide on the left side is a box plot which is providing us a useful information about how the nodal prices are changing hour by hour in each country. So there is a sort of analysis of how the LMPs are varying across the time. This is not a direct information on the necessity of reviewing a bidding zone configuration, but anyhow, this is helping us in understanding how good are our results, and this helped us in confirming that anyhow the prices that we got are in a reasonable range, considering the assumption that we made, considering the commodity price that we that we considered for the study. And so this graph is helping us in saying, okay, the results are more or less reasonable. In the right side, we can see how LMPs are changing across the space. So we derived an indicator which provide us a rough overview in how much the price is, let's say, diverging inside a given country. This indicator is, of course, indicative. It's not conclusive, but this is derived from the difference in each hour between the 95th percentile of the LMP in the given country and the 5th percentile. And higher, this is indicator, higher is the price difference between these two values of the prices inside this country. So this right graph can provide us an information that, of course, inside different countries, we can see a market spread. So this means that the nodal simulation is effectively considering also internal congestion, and this is creating internal price differences. We can go to the next slide. Okay, in this slide we can see how the congestion are impacting in the different weeks. So we say that we simulated 24 weeks. So we had 3 climate years, and for each climate years we simulated 8 weeks. And for each of these weeks, of course, the system conditions are different in terms of load, in terms of renewables, in terms of availability of the different resources. And this is leading to different flows in the power system, and so different congestion level. Here you can see the indicator that we derived, which is the sum of the shadow prices of the binding critical network element and contingencies. And this is also confirming us that there is the weeks that we selected and we simulated are anyhow covering different system conditions. So we have some weeks in which there are a lot of congestion in the power system. There are some weeks in which there are few congestion in the power system. And so lower shadow prices, lower price spread between the different areas of the network. Again, here remembering that the LMP's results are not the only input for the for the deriving alternative bidding zone configuration, you cannot focus on the different countries here, because here you can see the shadow price is, let's say, allocated to the country in which the congested element is located, but this picture is not providing any information on the source of the congestion, on who is, let's say, feeding in the energy that is passing through this element. So this is, of course, an indicator. This provides us a qualitative overview on the results. This is not conclusive. We can go in the next slide. Okay, so as Fred mentioned, we run also some tests for testing the effect of the topological remedial action. Due to time constraints in the modeling chain, we were not able to perform an extensive simulation of the topological remedial action on the whole set of weeks. So we limited this sensitivity test to 3 selected weeks among the 24. For this reason, we focused our attention on most congested week, but also considering the different geographical location of the congestion, just to be sure we can test the effect of topological remedial action in different regions. So we selected 3 weeks out of the 24, which was weeks 31st of 1989, week 31st of 2009, and week 48 of 2009. These are in all of these 3 weeks are in the top of the most congested weeks that we have seen in the previous slide, but they are not the top 3 simply because we would have looked at the effect on different area of the power system. And so this is why we selected the first week, which is the most congested across all the synchronous area, but then the next 2 has been selected to be sure we can catch the effect in particular regions which try to implement the topological remedial action. Topological remedial action has been applied mainly by 4 countries, France in all 3 weeks, Czech Republic in a couple of them, and Spain and Portugal on the last one, because this last one was the one that was congested for the Iberian Peninsula. As we can see in the chart, this is providing a sort of weighted average LMPs for the whole area, and how we can see there is a slight decrease in the LMP level that we can observe thanks to the effect of the topological remedial action. So topological remedial action are somehow allowing a better dispatch, are more efficient dispatch for the power system. We can go in the next slide. Okay, and as already mentioned, we also run some sensitivity test on commodity prices. Of course, there is a link with the first question we had today. So how the evolution of the commodity price that we have observed in the recent months, and especially in the recent weeks, could impact the results of the overall bidding zone review process. Of course, there is not a direct and strict answer and easy answer to this question. Anyhow, what we try to do in our LMP simulation is to select 1 week and to test the effect of the commodity prices. So we changed the input of the commodity prices from the initial one, which were the ones adopted in the MAF 2020, and we increased these values up to the values that we have observed in the recent months. And what, of course, we observed is that the LMPs naturally increased, and we also identified some additional critical network elements that are now binding and that were not binding in the previous runs. This is, of course, a sensitivity test run on one week. This is again not altering the overall picture of the LMP results. Anyhow, this is to let's say show how the results are anyhow sensitive to input variables, and this is why we tried anyhow to have an overview on this. Next slide, please. And I think with this one, we are reaching to the Q&A session. I've seen some question in the chat. So maybe we can pick up the first ones and go in order and answer to two or three of these questions, Fred. Would it be okay for you?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay. I see a question from Jan Rombach. I don't know if we would open the microphone and leave him to put the question, or if we can simply read it.
Maybe easier to read it.
Okay, so the question is, how were the representative weeks selected? And if you only model selected weeks at a time, how do you consider the seasonal impact interaction on the market? I don't know, Fred, if you want to tackle it or if you prefer I go through it.
Oh, please go ahead if that's fine for you.
Okay. So we developed dedicated methodology, as Fred mentioned before, for selecting climate years and weeks. The goal of this methodology, of course, ideally we should have, we would have simulated much more hours, much more weeks, but there is time that we had time constraints due to the complexity of the model and the dimension of the model, and of course to the deadline of the process. This is why we decided to go for selecting a subset of climate years and climate weeks. What we applied is what we developed was a methodology that was aiming at identifying a set of climate weeks, let's say 24 climate weeks, having let's say a distribution curve of the residual load, meaning residual minus in feed from renewable energy, which fit well with the overall distribution curve of the residual load across all the weeks and the climate years that we have at our disposal as input data. Looking also at the geographical distribution, so not looking only to the overall Europe at once, but having also dedicated, let's say, weighting the different region in this assessment. Anyhow, we will provide much more details on this methodology in the report that we will publish in a couple of months, and this is how we selected the climate weeks and years. Regarding the second topic, how we manage the fact that simulating, let's say, in disconnected weeks, we had anyhow to manage seasonal impact mainly from storages. From our understanding, what we did, as Fred said, is to run a zonal model, so a simplified model, because it was only on a zonal basis, but for the overall year. So for the 3 climate years, we run a yearly model, which is called a midterm model on a zonal basis, that was aimed at optimizing the hydro storage during during the whole year, and then considering these target values, we provided these fixed target values as an input for each climate weeks that we simulated. So there is a sort of a hierarchical approach in which we run a yearly model for defining these targets, and then we provided these targets to the weekly simulation where we applied the nodal approach for each timestamp. I hope this clarified.
Yeah, maybe I can take one additional question before going to the next topic. I just checked the agenda and I think we have time until 1:45. So maybe I can just take a quick question. And there was a question from Lauren on how new circuit lines are determined and whether this is an exogenous or an input, or whether some sort of model output. And what we did in the course of our project was to base our assumptions in terms of grid projects on the TYNDP 2020 project. And in order to comply with the target date of the LMP simulations, June 2025, we downgraded this grid model from the TYNDP process to ensure that we only have projects included that are to be commissioned until June 2025, according to our best expectation at this point in time. So to answer the question, new circuit lines, they are an input in terms of grid projects to the simulations and not an output of the simulations.
Martha, do we have time for answering an additional question, or should we go ahead?
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay. Let's go in order. I see a question asking, are all cross-border lines included as the initial CNEs? Yes, we developed a methodology for selecting CNEs. In this case, what we did is to run a central assessment in which we run an initial simulation without the n-1 constraint, but only in n-0. And we identified the most, not say congested, but the most loaded lines across all the timestamps that we simulated. And we then selected all the lines that were loaded at least 70% in at least 1 hour of the simulated period. This threshold was lowered to 50% for double circuit lines, because if one trips go to the other, one by one in some cases. And this provided us the initial set of CNEs, and we also included the cross-border lines in this list. And then we ran a contingency selection procedure. So we ran an automatic procedure that for each of these critical network elements identified the contingencies across the system that would have an higher impact, so would increase the flow in an higher way. And so we derived a central list for these CNEs. Then we provided this list to TSOs for validation, and we allowed TSOs to complement this list with additional elements that maybe are already considered in capacity calculation procedures today, and we couldn't identify for some reason. And there are other reasons, and anyhow, any addition would have been explained by TSOs and transparently reported to HACER, this reason. And that's it. This is how we derived the final CNE list. Please note that TSOs couldn't exclude the elements from the CNE list. So there is no possibility to say, I would not monitor this element in the simulation. Even in this case, in the report that we published, we will describe also this methodology into much more details.
Okay, so maybe we can pass to the next section of the workshop. We will still have time in the end for a general question and answer session. So Ivar.
Hi. Yes, I'm Ivar Husevang from Statnett, and I'll go through a bit of the process and the results that we have for the Nordic LMP project. So we've used a different tool from the Central European. We've used BID3 from AFRY. The BID3 is a market model which has recently gotten an addition to also be able to model nodal prices. This is a tool that we're very familiar with in the Nordic TSOs, but we were new to this usage of a network model in BID3. And it's been quite a lot of work to get everything working and all the data to function correctly. And we've used a complete Nordic power system model, power grid model in BID3. So this full Nordic model includes over 10,000 nodes. But when calculating the actual nodal prices, they have been aggregated. So each station above 200 kV have been a node, and not every single, also lower voltage nodes. So in total, the number of nodes that's been calculated prices for is more in the area of 1,000 rather than 10,000. Flows on all lines, both high voltage and low voltage, have been calculated. And we have calculated the results for 3 weather years, 3 complete weather years with hourly time resolution. So some of the background for us choosing a different tool in the Nordics and the work we've had here is that we have a very hydropower dominated system, and simulating a longer period, hour by hour and continuously, is very important to us to be able to model the storage and reservoir operations correctly. That's a very big part of the Nordic power system, and very important to us to represent in the best way possible when doing this work. It's been a challenging process with a lot of updates, and we're quite happy with the results at the end, even though it took a long time to get there. It's the CNECs that's been provided. They have been provided by each TSO, and we've started out with the CNECs that's being used in the flow-based project currently on the way in Nordics. The Nordics are planning to go over to flow-based market coupling hopefully next year, and as a part of the parallel run, so testing process, we are providing CNECs at the moment. And this has been the basis for the CNECs that we've been using in the Nordic system. So every TSO has had the responsibility itself to provide these CNECs to the project, the LNP project, and we've tried to correct, or we have corrected for the differences between the current system and the system that we have used for 2025. Yes, I think we can go to the next slide. So the results that we have gotten is quite recognizable. Of course, as the Central European part explained, the input is not quite it's not quite the same as we maybe expected today for 2025, but still we think this is a very representative for the we think the results are still kind of representative of what is the goal of this process, to calculate price differences and nodal prices across the Nordics. So we see a clear north-south pattern for prices, with lower prices in the north and higher prices in the south. We also see a lot as expected, that we have a large degree of price convergence between nodes in especially Finland and Denmark, while there are more price differences within, for instance, the southern parts of the Nordics. Yeah, I think we can take the next slide as well. So the price differences and the pattern that we've been seeing is quite familiar to us. We're seeing congestions pretty much going a lot along the current bidding zone borders, but there are also some internal congestions that we are observing. The north-south pattern, of course, is very familiar and something that we see today as well, even though we are at a very much higher price level than we're used to, and which is also maybe in the expectation for going forward. Yeah, and more, even though CNECs have been, they are quite spread out, this is definitely the most detailed market simulation and network model with CNECs that's ever been run for the Nordics. But there are quite a large degree, as I said, of price convergence within Finland and DK2. Yeah. yeah, I think that's a quick summary of the results for the Nordics. Maybe we can take the next slide. Yeah, so for both the Central European and Nordic and all of the results, the LMP report and results are going to be published to the ENTSO-E website during June or July. The amount of results and detail of results depends also on the member states' possibility and legality of publishing results for their country. But yeah, the results will be published in June, July. I think that was the presentation for the Nordic parts. My questions?
I do not see any. We have a question from Per Lundström. So you have it in the chat, but
yeah.
Maybe
so,
I can maybe give you the clue.
I can read a question. Per asks, in the Nordic region, we have several plans for large changes in both consumption and production already. 2025, have you taken the planned changes in consideration in the simulation? Yeah, this is a 2025 data set. So we're based it on a European planning data set for 2025. So we've not done as many sensitivities as the Central European has maybe, and maybe as we would like as well. We are going to the bidding zone review, but we hope we can do even more work than we've done now. A lot of the work have unfortunately gone into the technical to get it to work, which I think has gone well at the end. But yes, some changes have been taken into account, definitely. And this is the 2025 scenario that was assumed 1.5 years ago. I don't know if there was any more Nordic specific questions in the chat.
I cannot see it, but if anyone wants to raise their hand, they can do it.
In the Q&A part, maybe there might be there.
Yeah, there's a hand.
A question from Ricard. I'm going to just open your microphone, so Ricard, you can do your question. You need to mute yourself, but you...
Yes, now I'm unmuted. Thank you. This is Ricard Nilsson from Nordpool. I also work as the head of Europex working power markets, but I guess I can ask for both, I guess, in this sense. One general question, and that's not just for the Nordic, but just for clarity, these, as I understand it, three separate settings of runnings. I'm curious to get some clarity on how the adjacent regions have been considered. Have they been considered sort of in an identical manner or by guesstimating of flows? So that's a general question for all three of you. And then for the Nordic, I have one question, and that's it's a difficult one, but I'm just curious about if you can say anything about how you have guesstimated the buy-sell orders on a node or a cluster of node level, because such data obviously don't exist today, other than, reporting from BSPs, BRPs, but that's not the same thing. So the second one was more specific, and I do understand and appreciate if you can't give any much of it, but I think it's somewhat relevant for the results.
Yeah, should we start with the Nordic specific question maybe about the buy-sell bids for the Nordics? This is a fundamental market model that we're running. So we modeled all of the consumption and production as generator and consumption, which is optimized in the simulation. So I mean, hydropower, of course, is maybe the main generation that has a strategy and a price in the Nordic simulations. And we have expanded the modeling of hydropower compared to what we usually have in the SPID3 model. We model every hydropower plant separately. They have been, each hydropower plant has been modeled with the generation inflow profile, reservoir, and they operate separately with bits and water value. The water value, however, is calculated in a more simplified, in an area-by-area basis. So that's based on an aggregated hydropower model, where the strategy for the plants is determined, and then the strategy is sent on or is used on a plant-by-plant basis. Unfortunately, we were not able to model cascades in this LNP work. That's also something we hope to address in the next phase. Would someone from the Central Europe maybe answer the general question?
Can you kindly repeat the general question?
The general question is an old one. I remember asking it 5 years ago in this pre-process of this, but it was about how the different runnings here, I know they are very complicated, so appreciate that, but how has, for example, the continental runnings considered the effects from the Nordics and Ireland, and how is Ireland considered continental, and how is Nordic considered continental? Is there sort of a common model for how these, basically what I'm saying is there at least on sort of the high level European level a common view, so that basically where the Nordic have run there, they had applied continental as you have agreed in the continental, or is it maybe because of complications in the model, so that you have simply made some estimations on sort of import-export flows and just sort of discarded the rest of Europe?
Okay, maybe I can take this for continental Europe side. Okay, for continental Europe and Ireland, this was a single model. This is why we presented it as a continental Europe and Ireland. So we covered both the synchronous areas. So the full input dataset model simulation are run with the very same settings and assumption, and the results are part of the same package, let's say. For the other areas, like for the Nordics, what we had is we taken the data from the same data sources that we use for the continental Europe, so they are coordinated in terms of scenarios and in terms of time frames. What we did in our model is, of course, we cannot go into much more details as the colleagues of the Nordic did for their area. We simply modeled them as zonal, as what we call non-nodal countries. So we have these areas modeled in our simulation, but at zonal level and with the cross-border capacity that we had available. So this is not a full model, of course, but we tried to catch also the effect of the areas around the continental Europe. Of course, this is also sort of compromise considering the dimension of the model and the time frame that we already mentioned, because this was very, very challenging for us at least.
Yeah, for the Nordics, we have modeled the rest of Europe as a fundamental power system models on the same way that we model the Nordics, but without the nodal. So we haven't done any nodal calculation for the rest of Europe, naturally. And for the Nordic simulation, we fixed the prices that we got from the fundamental simulation of the rest of Europe. So they are fixed prices on the borders where you can import and export. And it's not an identical data set to the rest of Europe, but it's based on the same general assumptions, I'd say. I see there's also one more Nordic-specific question in the Q&A. And it says, why does Nordic analysis tend to be some configurations not already been selected? And that's asked by Paul. And I don't know if I have an answer for this, but the Nordics did deliver an alternative bidding zone configuration to be analyzed 2 years ago. But we have still been part of this process as well to determine bidding zones. And it's I think as we said in the introduction to this seminar, I think we are very thankful for the opportunity to work with this and to try out something which is technically very difficult. But I think the value still, when we have done this, is very high. So I think it's been a learning experience to be part of this work. I don't see any more Nordic questions, so I guess we're about on time as well. Maybe we can go on.
Yes, thank you very much, Ivar. We can maybe pass to the next section of the workshop, which is the Pan-European Studies. Emmanuel, the floor is yours. No, sorry. I missed the next steps of the evidence review. Just the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks. Name is Joost Gunsven, working for Tenet. It's my honor to present to you the next steps for the bidding zone review. And this is actually what follows once ACER has taken a final decision on the configurations to be investigated. If we go to the next slide, we take a look again at the whole process of the bidding zone review, which started with please take slide 30 again. And we started with the methodology, the LMPs, which we had a lot of this discussion just now. On TSO side, we did the LMP calculations, and now the data has been handed over to ACER, and the decision is eventually in their hands on what alternative configurations have to be studied in each of the regions. Once we have that decision, as TSOs, we have a year time to perform the full bidding zone review, what we sometimes also call the main study. Assuming, well, the indication that ACER has given is that the decision is expected around the 1st of July, which would thus mean that as TSOs we have from the 1st of July this year till the 1st of July next year to perform all the necessary calculations. Go to the next slide. Here we take a look at the bidding zone review regions, which was already raised in the beginning. In the methodology, originally, we as TSOs proposed to perform the review in multiple regions. And this proposal was made to reduce the model complexity. I think already the numbers were huge here, the amount of nodes, the amount of network elements to consider. So if you break it down in a bit smaller regions, it's become more manageable for all the tools that we use. But there are also some aspects with respect to confidentiality that in particular for the Nordic area, not all the data could simply be shared with the other TSOs, which is also one of the reasons why we had to resort to using different modeling. For these regions, so we think Central Europe is one of the key regions, Nordics. We have also some of the smaller regions listed here. Eventually, it will just be up to ACER to decide which of these regions need to study alternative configurations, and then for each region to pick that up. Go to the next slide. Within the main study, as TSOs, we have the task to study a number of 22 indicators, which are categorized along 4 groups of indicators. So we have a group of network security. We have a group of market efficiency, which contains the most indicators. Then we have a group of indicators which together are required to assess the stability and robustness of the bidding zone configuration. And then we have a 4th category, which is new compared to what was originally listed in the KECAN regulation, and that's related to the energy transition. So I say, how suitable are the alternative configurations to facilitate the energy transition? All these indicators need to be assessed in the process. A majority of them will get also a monetary value. Some of them will only be assessed on a qualitative way. Like, do we think this alternative configuration performs better, equal, or worse than the status quo configuration? 2 indicators are particularly relevant, and they are marked here in green. Those are the market liquidity and transaction cost, and the indicator for transition cost. With transition cost, we mean, let's say, the cost of changing IT systems, regulations, everything to be able to implement the alternative configuration. These two indicators will be studied on a pan-European level. So this will be done by all the regions together and not per region individually, because let's say to ensure consistency for these indicators. All the other indicators will be, in principle, be evaluated per region. Go to the next slide, and then we go stepwise, show you a bit I'd say how the challenge that we have for doing all this modeling. So first of all, for doing the assessment, we start out with performing an ENTSO-E market simulation to get a base case situation. A second step in the process, next click, please. Not in control of the slide, so Georgie, yes. Second, after that, we perform, let's say, the regular day-ahead capacity calculation, which we either do in a flow-based manner for those regions using flow-based, or based on ENTSO-Es for those the CCR still using ENTSO-E calculations. After that, once the capacities have been calculated, we perform market simulations. So for that, we use tools like Plexos, for example, that we can then assess to determine the price per bidding zone. If we have that, we go to the next step, which is to perform operational security analysis. This resembles the daily process the TSOs carry out after the day-ahead market coupling, and where we check whether the outcome of the day-ahead market coupling does not violate operational security limits. If it does, then we're also going to look at what kind of remedial actions can we take, with redispatch, counter trade, those kind of things, to resolve those issues. As a fifth step, we also will assess the loop flows in the systems, because these are very important also with respect to whether an alternative configuration makes it possible to meet, for example, the 70% target. So this is all the steps we need to take. For that, we need a lot of input data. So we take input from the Pan-European Market Modeling Database, the PEMMDB. So that's, let's say, the collective set of data which is governed by ENTSO-E that all the regions will use. So by doing that, we ensure consistency here on the data set. We use a grid model, which represents the grid for the target year 2025. So with all the projects which are still coming and will be live per 30th June 2025. And another input will be the alternative bidding zone configurations, and that will then all be tested. And there's this, the purple bar in between is somehow we need to automate this because it's a lot of steps. Time is limited, so we need to automate this in a high way. Click one more time. In the end, if everything works as it should, we would then get a lot of indicator results, which will then flow into an evaluation process. Go to the next slide, please. The evaluation process. Well, 2 slides back, I listed 22 indicators. Some will get a monetary, a clear single value. Some will be qualitatively evaluated. Of course, it's not easy to somehow mix qualitative statements with numbers to say, okay, is this configuration performing better eventually for the total set of indicators or worse than the status quo? So that is why ACER came up with a quite elaborate process for, I'd say, processing the results of those 22 indicators into a final recommendation about whether the bidding zone configuration has to be adjusted or can be maintained. First step is to perform a welfare analysis. So this is based actually on the economic efficiency indicators, and it's the first test. So does an alternative configuration lead to higher economic efficiency than the status quo? If not, the configuration is already discarded and doesn't have to be further analyzed. If it's positive, then we go to the next step, which is step 2. And then we're going to assess the non-monetized criteria. So this is the qualitative elements. Taking these into account, we have to list, I don't know, like if there are 10, like our 8 saying it's positive, 2 are perhaps negative, then overall it seems okay. But it can also be vice versa. But we have to check this. As a third step, we're going to have to consult the authorities on the acceptability. So we have then the list of TSOs. We can say, well, perhaps there are so many negatives from a qualitative point of view. We think this is not acceptable. This needs to be consulted with the authorities and then to be confirmed. It could be indeed that then some configurations are set aside if there is a clear justification that there are qualitative reasons why that configuration should still not be chosen. If there are no fundamental objections, so there's no agreement that it's not acceptable in this case, so or you could say it is acceptable, then simply the alternative configuration which provides the highest economic efficiency will be eventually recommended. This is, yeah, I know this is a diagram. There's a lot of, I think, multiple pages about how the process exactly looks like. Putting that on a timeline for the review, I mentioned before we have 1 year. We have approximately actually 6 months for doing all the calculations, because before the end of the 6th month, we also need to issue a public consultation as TSOs about the results and the first findings. So we have the first 6 months, which will span on doing all the modeling, the simulation chain, which is highly ambitious to do this all in 6 months. And in parallel, we do this pan-European studies on the transition costs and the liquidity. We bring that together in the consultation. We're going to ask for your input as well. Together with your input, we might perhaps change a few bits depending on what we get back. We're going to do this qualitative evaluation and this acceptability check. And that's step 2, step 3. Once that has been done, eventually we arrive at step 4 for the final assessment. Need to wrap everything up in a report. And then if everything goes well, after 12 months, we have a publication of a report containing, let's say, the full analysis and indicators, as well as the recommendation. Along this process, stakeholders will be involved via multiple ways. We'll touch upon that later as well in the slide deck. But public webinars like we have today will be organized. We'll have, of course, the public consultation. But we're also thinking about setting up a so-called consultative group where we might be able to exchange with a smaller group of representatives to make it a bit easier to exchange views also in between. But we'll explain later during this workshop. So that's more or less for the next steps. I can imagine there are a lot of questions about the details. So how will exactly the modeling work? What tools will be used? The regions are working on that. We're happy to present more about this to you, but it will be for our next webinar, which will be around the start of the bidding zone review. So time for some questions. I have seen that several have come in, but I haven't been able to follow them or see what are the most important ones. So somebody could assist me in here, that would be great.
Yeah, this last question I see is on the slide 34.
Mm-hmm.
Does step 1 exclude configurations with important non-monetary advantage, but a slightly monetary disadvantage?
In principle, yes, although I think an exception is possible, but that would need to be justified. And I think it's actually the asterisk, which is at the bottom of the slide. So TSOs may decide to not reject an alternative configuration, and I said to bring it on to the next steps. But of course, there should be good reasons for that. You can't just do that.
There is a hand raised from someone, but maybe before we jump on that, there's another question in the Q&A with regards to this. So one is for step 1 and step 2. Step 1 and step 2 should be combined because there is a risk that configurations that score high on non-monetized criteria were kicked out. I think this is more of a statement rather than a question.
Yeah. This is, yeah, I guess it's more of a statement, huh? I think as a basis, we as TSOs need to work with what has been established now in the biddings and review methodology. So, of course, you could think about organizing this whole evaluation process differently. And we've had also as TSOs many exchanges with Acer and NRAs, but this is the way we'll have to do it for this review. And this is what we as TSOs intend to follow. So yeah, yes, yeah, we can elaborate a lot on what could have been done otherwise, but I don't think that's very relevant in the context of the challenge we have right now.
Maybe we can take question. Natalie has her hand raised. Natalie, you can use your microphone.
Perfect, thank you. So it's Natalie from BDW Germany. I wanted to go back to the point Johannes also raised in the beginning, what we're going to do about this whole changing time. I think for a couple of weeks, we don't only see very high fuel prices, but this might have a change on generation. It might have a change on consumption. So really big points, which you also consider in the biddings review. And also there's like another point I see. It seems that we will have a lot to do, like also stakeholders in the next year from summer on. And I don't really see that anyone has the capacity at the moment because we're discussing so many topics: high prices, security of supply, alternative fuels, alternative ways to organize our whole generation. So I was wondering if it might not be reasonable to postpone the whole process for about a year and maybe give us some time to see how the whole, how the whole develops in the next year. And as it should be a robust result anyway, I don't think a year is that important in that sense.
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways of looking at it. First of all, I think TSOs have to follow, in this case, what the regulation states, which is that we have 1 year, we have a deadline of 1 year to deliver the study once the final decision has been taken. I mean, if the authorities, in this case, perhaps say the combination of Acer and European Commission, would decide that there are reasons to postpone it, then TSOs could postpone it. But it's not a decision which is in our hands or something that we are sorting for. Yeah, the regulation as it currently states and the process, we're already doing a lot of preparations here. So we do everything, I'd say, to be able to meet the deadline. And are not looking for arguments or so to postpone the whole process. That's one thing. I think if there is good reasons for stakeholders to do believe that a delay is better in this case, then yeah, feel free to give these kind of arguments to the relevant authorities. But I don't think that's a lot of use to direct them to us. Secondly, about the whole changing environment. Yes, it's certainly true that the whole environment has been changing, but also because all those changes, we do see that there are parts in the grid which are congested as such. So it doesn't mean that there is not a need to check whether there might be alternative configurations which could be better. There can also be a benefit here of changing it, despite that everything is changing. I mean, during the energy transition, the world will keep changing until 2050. So yeah, I think there can always then be reasons to not go forward. Yeah, I don't. I think just postponing it because things are changing, well, then we can never do a review actually.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps another question which I see here, like, okay, how many time will it be for the implementation? I think if we go to the timeline, perhaps, slide here, assuming we would start the full process in the 1st of July this year, we're able to complete it within a year. So we'll have a recommendation, say summer next year. Then member states will have 6 months to take a decision on the recommendation. So it means that member states somewhere end of 2023, early 2024 would have to take a decision on what to do with the alternative configuration or what to do with the recommendation. So either to maintain the current configuration or to change it. If they can't find unanimous agreement, then the decision will be escalated to the European Commission, which then has also 6 times to take a decision here as a matter of last resort. So if that path would be followed, then ultimately summer 2024, there would be a final decision. Taking into account all the changes which need to happen on an alternative configuration, it's quite likely that you'll need 2, 3, or perhaps even more years to actually implement such a configuration. So I would say if you just take 3 years, which would also be, I'd say, after the liquid period of existing contracts, which I'd say would minimize the impact for a lot of stakeholders, then you add just 3 years. So we're around 2026 before we could, I'd say, have this alternative configuration in place. So this whole process, from at least my personal point of view, I don't see any changes happening before the year of 2026.
Thank you very much, just for getting deeper into this part of the biddings and review. I would propose that we move them to the next section of the workshop. Now is the Pan-European Studies, and for this, Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marta. So I'm Emmanuel Daraparias. I'm working for Trusted DW, and I'm leading the package on transition costs for the bidding zone review. So I will present you the 2 panel studies that are going to be performed during the bidding zone review. The first one on the transition costs, and the second one on the market liquidity and transaction costs. So maybe, Georgie, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So transition costs, I've seen a question in the chat on transition costs. They refer to the one-off costs expected to be incurred in case the bidding zone configuration is amended. So they are part, as presented by Joost, of the list of criteria to be evaluated during the bidding zone review. And especially with the transition cost, the bidding zone review methodology foresees to calculate the minimum lifetime of a bidding zone configuration by comparing these transition costs with the monetized benefits of a bidding zone configuration. So in order to estimate these transition costs properly, a study needs to be performed for all bidding zone review regions. And for the TSOs and ENTSO-E have decided to contract Compass Lexicon to perform this study on their behalf. The first step of the study would be to collect input data from European stakeholders that are necessary to evaluate these transition costs. These input data would be gathered through a dedicated questionnaire. We are currently starting to elaborate this questionnaire, but as we foresee to involve the market parties in the elaboration via the consultative group. So I think Joost would present or would tell afterwards what exactly is going to happen in this duplicative group, but the first step would be to, or at least we would like to use this group to gather comments on the questionnaire that we are currently preparing before sending it to all EU stakeholders. Soon after the start of the bidding zone review, which is foreseen around beginning of July, we will communicate the questionnaire to EU stakeholders, who will then have in turn approximately 2 months to fill in this questionnaire. So this is a very important input for the evaluation of the transition costs, because the better the quality of this input data are, the better the estimation of the transition cost would be. And once all the data would be gathered, then the transition cost would be estimated, and they would be presented for comment to the European community during the general public consultation, which is going to happen around 6 months after the start of the bidding zone review. So after the once the cost would be estimated, you will have also the opportunity to comment on the estimation that are going to be provided. The second study, if you go to the next slide, Georgie, is on market liquidity and transaction costs. The bidding zone review methodology considers market liquidity and transaction costs as a criteria to be studied as part of the market efficiency, as presented before. The methodology details the steps to be followed in order to perform this market liquidity analysis. It consists mainly on a data analysis considering historical and also future data for each bidding zone consideration. Those data are going to be compiled in a report that would be consulted during the general public consultation, and for which you will have the opportunity to provide comments. And based on these comments, the final conclusion on market liquidity and transaction costs will be then included in the bidding zone review report. This study on market liquidity and transaction costs is also going to be performed by Compass Lexicon, together with the study on transition costs. So if we go to the next slide, we have an overview. I mean, this is the same timeline. Georgie, can you please go to slide 41? Thank you. So this is a general timeline that has been presented before, but with the focus on the pan-EU studies. So we see that we have a very tight timeline to gather the data and estimate the transition costs on the one hand. So this is going to take place in the first half of the bidding zone review, and we would need to have your contribution here, especially at the beginning of the review process during the first 2-3 months after the start of the review. So I don't know if there is your questions on this part of the presentation. I did not have the opportunity to follow the chat during my presentation. So. I see an entry.
Yes, there was one. Yeah, Johannes.
Should I go ahead?
Yes. Please.
Yeah, I posted the question in the Q&A as well, but you mentioned the bidding zone review consultative group. How is this going to be formed, and what kind of associations members will be there, and how often will that consultative group meet over the process of the year? Can you shed some light on this?
Marta, Jos, maybe you can answer this question.
Yes, but we will have a specific section in the workshop just after this one. So I would propose that we wait to do the presentation on this, and we will solve after all the questions you may have.
And then we have a question from Marie.
Yes, thank you. I've posted some questions about this transition cost. What do you put exactly behind transition costs, please? And I've seen as well that there is a question on it in the chat. But what is included in the welfare that was presented previously at the first loop? And yes, I was wondering if there is an official list of monetized and non-monetized criteria to be followed in the process. Thank you.
Okay, so I will answer the first question on what is exactly behind the transition cost. So as I said, I mean, they refer to one-off costs expected to incur in case of a change of billing zone configuration. So these are costs such as changes to internal business processes, IT changes that are needed in case of a change of billing zone configuration, but also costs for the adjustment or termination of agreements, adjustment of trading processes. I mean, we are currently preparing a list of type of costs that we consider as transition costs and for which you would be requested to provide figures on the impact on your processes. So
yes, but maybe to be more precise, the impact on assets that are exposed to market prices. Is it envisaged? So either in infrastructure or yes, you told about contracts, but assets, electricity assets mainly.
Yes, probably. Yes, I mean, as said, we are currently working on it. So there is no detailed list, and this is also something that we would like to discuss with the consultative group to be sure that we do not forget any cost. And you will have also the opportunity in the questionnaire to add cost categories in case they are not part of the questionnaire or they have been maybe forgotten or not considered relevant by the TSOs, but are relevant for the market parties.
If I may add, there is the methodology for the billing zone review prescribes some categories on transition costs, but the impact on the value of individual assets is as such not specified as an element to be included in transition cost. So if because of, let's say, an average price increase or decrease in a certain bidding zone where an asset is located, this would impact the value of the asset. The change in the value of the asset or depreciation following from that is not something which qualifies as a transition cost. The transition cost should rather be seen as the one-off costs resulting from the change in the market setup. I think it's covered in Article 15.11 from the methodology. You can take a look. There.
Thank you very much, then, Emmanuel, just for the presentation. I would propose then that we move to the last part of the workshop today. Well, not the last one, the last presentation. After we will still have the question and answer part, which is the stakeholder involvement. I will take this part of the presentation. My name is Marta Mendoza. I work in ENTSO-E. I'm the bidding zone task force convener. And in this part of the workshop, what we want to introduce you is how do we intend to involve you, all of you, all the stakeholders regarding this process. When I'm talking about process, maybe just to highlight that I'm talking about the biddings and review. So what will be starting from the moment that Acer will decide on the alternative configurations till the moment that the TSOs will deliver the recommendation to the member states. So how do we intend to interact with you? It's through mainly 4 channels. The first one is the MESC, Market Stakeholders Committee. We intend to do a high-level update in every meeting of the MESC. The second way is through this Pan-European Consultative Group that I'm going to have a specific slide after this one. We want to create this specific group, which is going to be limited group to only 25 people. The idea is to make it manageable, and the idea is to have extensive and open interactions with the different group associations, and also have different updates. The idea is to have around between 3 and 5 meetings in 1-year process that will last the biddings and review. We also intend to have public webinars. These webinars will be open, like this one that we are having here. The idea that we have today is to organize 4. It could be more, it could be less, but that's the idea today. This is the first one before the start of the biddings and review. We intend to have one in the beginning, another one in the middle around the public consultation, and the one in the end to present the results publicly. The last channel we intend to use is the ENTSO-E website. We want to have a specific page that will be available soon, most probably before the start of the biddings and review. And we want to inform you there about the different meetings that may take place, share the presentation, the minutes, the announcement, so it would be easily followed by all of you. So those are the 4 main channels we intend to interact with all of you. If we move to the next slide, you will be able to see a general timeline. Again, this is completely depending on when the biddings and review will be, and this will be marked by the moment in which Acer will do the decision on alternative configurations. We think, after of course discussing with Acer, that it will be end of June, July. So that's why we have done our planning considering these working assumptions. So we will share these slides with you. Nothing new. We will have the biddings and review consultative groups with the meetings. We have public webinars. We have the MESC. We will have a public consultation. We will also have regional meetings if needed, and also specific meetings of pan-European studies, or maybe we will have them all together in different workshops. So we will see how it's better to be organized according to the different advance of the different projects. If we move to the next slide, which will be the last slide of my presentation, it gives you an idea of this biddings and review consultative group. So maybe just to tell you that the final terms of reference of this biddings and review consultative group will be published in ENTSO-E website by today, end of the day. So you will have easily access to them. A draft has been already shared to the MESC participant just in advance of this meeting to facilitate a bit the work. The idea of this group is again to advise ENTSO-E, its members, but also that this group will provide input to the biddings and review. There's some specific topics, some specific surveys that we may need, that the TSOs does not have the main knowledge. Maybe market parties are better placed. So we will use this group also to gather this knowledge. And if the quantity of participants is limited, because we need to make it manageable. If not, it will be just too big and too complex to meet often and to have inputs. And we will also allow, in any case, to have for example, national positions forwards through these main associations to this group, and of course we will consider it. But again, the idea is that we will have 25 people, limited to 15 representatives for the different stakeholders. We will have ACER, Commission, and NRAs involved. This will not be counted into the 25 people. And of course, we will have the TSOs, ENTSO-E, and the different regions that will participate in this group. Regarding how it's going to take place in case it's needed the selection process, if we do not have more than 15 candidatures, is fine. We will accept everybody. In case we have more, we will have to carry out a selection process. The idea is that we will, the priority will be for representation to the European Stakeholders Organization. In any case, there will not be more than 2 representatives per organization. We will also want to have a geographical representation. So the geographical background of the concrete candidate will also be considered. We will try to have not more than 2 representatives per country. Of course, also the European Research Institutes are also welcome to join. And well, this is mainly the main way of selecting us. As I say, we do not intend to select the specific candidates. The idea is that each association should be able to decide to send them better in this stakeholders group, of course, with the limitation of maximum 2 representatives per organization. Maybe also to tell you that we also aim to start the work of this group by the end of May. And for this, we will kindly ask you to notify your interest by the 13th of May. For this, you have the email to Georgie, and please add a short paragraph, no more than 150 pages, no 50 pages, please, 50 words, just with the motivation of your association to join this stakeholders group. So, as I said, these terms of reference will be published just after this workshop, and you will have access to them. It will be great if we can have the candidates and the candidatures by the 13th of May, so we can start already the work in June. So this is how we mainly see the involvement of the stakeholders, of all of you, in this process. Maybe also to clarify that in addition to these meetings, we will have specific meetings with the NRAs and ACER, as we have had along the full process that started already 2 years ago. And maybe also say that we, just looking at the chat and the questions and answers that we have received during the workshop, we realized that it seems to be a topic which raised a lot of interest from all of you. We will try to work in the future to improve also how to do these questions and answers also during the workshop. Also, I saw a question that it would have been better to share the material in advance. We also take note to this, and we try to improve this for the future regarding this interaction. So, having said this, I don't know if there's any specific question that you would like to raise. And if not, maybe my suggestion will be that we move to the last part of the workshop. We only have 10 minutes, so which is the final general questions and answers. So that way we open the floor to all of you to ask any questions that you would like of all the topics that has been presented here in the workshop today. So if anybody would like to make a question, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. I do not see any hands, but I don't know, maybe any of my colleagues would like to take any of the questions.
So, Marta, if there are no additional questions, I could maybe take two I had seen. One question was, will potential offshore bidding zones be included in the review? Was the question in the beginning. Answer is no, this will not be included according to the ASO methodology. So it's not up to us TSOs to decide on that or not. It's the ASO methodology, but still I understand why ASO decided in that way. This would make a complex equation and work almost unsolvable, as offshore bidding zone is still on a policy debate and thus will not be included in this bidding zone review.
If I may add, Peter, I think there's also a practical reason, because the target year is 2025, and for that target year, there are not yet offshore hubs foreseen. So that is also one of the reasons why, there is as such not a trigger to investigate the configuration within such a hub, because it's non-existent for this target year.
Yeah. So this question will come back at a certain stage, but will not be part of this process. Then another question I've seen, but I think this was presented what are transition costs, but I think Emmanuel presented well, but just to give an example, in case there would be a split of bidding zone and you would be a market participants having different customers in one bidding zone, and there would be a split, then they would be in different bidding zones, and you would have to provide them with different prices. There you might have some transition costs, and this was a bit what was presented by Emmanuel, Jost, and as well Marta. When you see costs as market participants, what that would mean to you, then please participate as well in this stakeholder consultative group, or even better, like we have only limited seats in the end for all these transition costs. We have a consultant, we can do a work, we're going to ask you as stakeholders, but please organize yourself as well in a way that you use your associations. In the end, we cannot ask each generator or each market party separately on their specific costs. In the end, you know your costs much better than we do or our consultant do. But it's important that you organize yourself, that you come up with concrete figures from your side. As concreter you are, as more easy it will be for us to consider it in our assessment in the end, and as well to include it in the final report. So are there other questions? I have seen another question, but colleagues, if you have seen some questions or if there is a hand raised, what I do not see. Could maybe shortly elaborate on one question where no simple answer is possible, but as there are no other questions, we have some minutes. There was a question I have seen by Richard Charles. Could you give an example for cases where a more economical efficient bidding zone design could reduce operational security? I must say a very simple answer is not possible, but there are examples. Let's look 20 years back. There we almost had no bidding zone borders in Europe, very seldom, in only some regions. I remember in 2004, I think we introduced the bidding zone border on the French-German border, on the Swiss-German border. At that stage, we had strong system security issues because their cross-border change increased a lot, but there have been no bidding zone borders. And the last bidding zone border that was introduced in 2018 was between Austria and Germany. At that time, we had market exchanges up to 10 gigawatt on this border, and their congestion management border, bidding zone border was introduced. But indeed, have seen as well some questions and point regarding what we could do with redispatch. Indeed, if bidding zone borders might be changed and even bidding zones might be merged, this was something being investigated in the first bidding zone review in 2018, but this is not foreseen according to the ASA methodology in this bidding zone review. So, any colleagues? We have still 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I see also a question on what is assumed regarding available cross-zonal capacity in relation to the 70%. I think the 70% and in general the whole target for cross-zonal trade impacts the biddings on review in two ways. First of all, it plays a role in the decision of ACER to come up with alternative configurations. Because besides clustering the LMPs into zones, ACER will also perform a flow decomposition analysis where they will check whether alternative configurations make it possible to meet the 70% and that there are not too high internal flows or loop flows, which would not make that possible. So this is, on the one hand, to be accounted for by ACER in the upcoming decision on the configurations. Second, it plays a role that once we have the configurations and we're going to do all the assessment, I showed you these steps, including the capacity calculation, there these targets will be an input value for the calculations. So in principle, there will always be this minimum will be made available. Only exception is for action plans, which might, for the year 2025, give a small discount compared to the 70%, which would then be that perhaps for some network elements, there will be a target of, say, around 60% instead of 70. But that's what will be assessed here. So it's kind of that for all the borders, all the network elements, this minimum capacity will be respected as simply as part of the whole chain. And then if it can, for some operational security reasons, not be met, this would come out during the step where we do the operational security assessment, where you then see that these providing this 60-70% would violate the security limits.
Okay, so it looks like that we are timely-wise on track. There are some more detailed questions inside the Q&A track. The colleagues from the group will have a view on it, but I guess the bigger questions are already answered during the process. If the colleagues see some open answers, they will directly contact you. Otherwise, I think you have seen the coming stakeholder process. We're going to present there, but please as well prepare from your side your inputs, like mentioned, these transition costs and others are warmly welcome, and prepare as well for your side. And if you have any points somehow from your side, even ahead of these stakeholder workshops, please contact us that we consider this as well ahead in this coming workshops. So I think we can sharply in this minute close the workshop, and I just could say thank you very much to all of you, for all participants and all of those who presented. Thank you.
We keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.